All right, everybody. Welcome to the Fins Up Network. It's Ben Morgan. And as we do from time to time, joined by the enemy. But I always like to say it's nice to get some insight from someone that covers the opposing team. I love to do these type of shows when you've got a game coming up, especially against the Green Bay Packers. So I am joined by Jacob Westendorf of the Packers Report to talk a little Dolphins Packers, this week's final preview and prediction video. Jacob, welcome. We chatted before we got started. We're football guys. I think this is going to go pretty damn well, but thank you very much for joining. Appreciate you jumping on. Why don't you go ahead and let everyone know a little bit about yourself and where they can find your work?
Sure. Yeah. Jacob Westendorf, like you mentioned, appreciate you having me. I always love doing stuff like this for other places. I learn, obviously I watch the NFL, not just the Packers. So I like getting some insight from how things are going, how fans are feeling from other teams as well. But yeah, you can find me at Packer Report 66, my Twitter handle at Jacob Westendorf. And pretty much all my work there is in the bio. I send a lot of pictures of my kids as well. So if you like cute babies, then I put out a lot of those as well. But yeah, I'm a big time sports fan. I enjoy just about everything you can think of. So definitely down for the back and forth and everything like that. So like I said, appreciate having me on. Let's talk about the second year in a row the Packers have played on Christmas Day. I don't think they're setting any franchise records this year like they did last year, but it'll be entertaining. It's a big one for both teams.
Well, pretty crazy too, because as you mentioned, Christmas Day, and there's only 3 games on Christmas Day. So this actually marks, if you want to call this a primetime game, which I'm kind of considering it that, third straight one for the Miami Dolphins, and the first 2 didn't really go as we as Dolphins plans would have hoped. So I'm not going to spoil anything. We're going to give some predictions at the end. I tell you what, I am going to spoil something. I'm going to have the Dolphins win, for the love of God, 1 time on primetime in the last 3 weeks. But obviously, we'll talk more Dolphins and everything. But I want to start with a question right away against the Packers, because you guys start 4-8. You win your last 2. Now you're sort of kind of creeping back into this little bit of playoff talk. And obviously, you got to win out. You need a bunch of help and everything. But what has changed from those first 12 weeks from the last 2 weeks? Is it simply that you played some lesser opponents, or are you guys doing a little something different? Are you catching fire late in the season?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. The Bears are the worst team in the NFL, not named the Houston Texans. And that's not, I mean, I would say that if I wasn't a Packers fan, but yeah, the Bears it's a Justin Fields one-man band down there. And I'm not even 100% sold on him either, but he can run. He can do that with the best of them. Can he play in the pocket? I don't know. That's something I think we find out next year, and as they build a better roster, because that roster is one of the worst in the NFL, and they'll need some time to rebuild that, and it looks like they're at least making some strides toward that. But other than playing, the Bears and then the Rams, who are a skeleton, like the Rams, you look at all these stars that they have on their roster. No Cooper Kupp, no Aaron Donald, no Matthew Stafford. Their offensive line is in shambles, like all that stuff. But the biggest change that the Packers have had is draft time. They traded 2 second-round picks for a guy named Christian Watson. And then Christian Watson missed all of camp with a knee injury. Yep. And then was kind of in and out. He obviously, if you guys watched the first game of the season, I don't remember if Miami played at 3:00 that day or not, but the Packers were the game of the week against the Vikings. The first play of scrimmage from the season, Watson beats Patrick Peterson. He's wide open for a touchdown, and he drops it. Yep. And that and stories have come out since, basically, that he lost his confidence after that. Like, it was hard for him to get back to that confident level. And then he was in and out of the lineup with injuries. He had they've been called not concussions, but like he was in the concussion protocol, cleared it, but then it was after Tua Gate, so they didn't play him, for optics, just as much as exactly. So there was that. And then he had another, an ankle injury that kept him out of a game. And then I always say, like, it's been crazy to watch Watson's ascension, because they play the Dallas Cowboys on November 13th, 2022 this year. And there's 2 plays right on the first series. Drop, back to back. And I was like, if you just pause the season right there and listen to everyone's thought, they're saying, this guy sucks. Yep. Like, a second-round bust. He can't catch the football. He can't do anything other than jet sweeps and like forced touches, and we're not even sure he can do that either. Yeah. And it's just like, we could have picked, George Pickens, Alec Pierce, whoever your receiver was in the second round that particular year, or they could have taken one in the first round, which that's never been joked about ever, which I think is stupid, but we can talk about that when you and I do a draft show together this offseason. And then he catches 3 touchdowns in that game. He catches the one over his shoulder, tough ball. And then, I always say like that one was nice because anybody can do anything once. But then later in that game, the Packers don't have a good record at that point, like you mentioned. And it's 4th down and it's the start of the 4th quarter. And Green Bay's down by 14 points at this time. So I call it 4th and ball game. And it was kind of 4th and season. Cause like if Green Bay loses against Dallas, obviously now they would be 5-9 at this point instead of 6-8. Watson runs a deep over route. Rodgers hits him. And I always say like your money downs go to your money players. When Miami needs a big play, it's Tyreek Hill, it's Jaylen Waddle. Those are the guys who are getting the ball. And we know that. And, you may draw up a different concept to figure out how to get those, but it's less about the concept and more about the player.
Correct.
Well, they drew that play up for Christian Watson. And ever since then, Watson's been on a tear. Like he's got a boatload of touchdowns in the last month and a half. And you saw Monday night, if you watched that game against the Rams, not a high impact game statistically, but his ability to like his speed changes the game. And you guys have kind of seen that this year. I mean, Waddle's fast and like slow compared to Tyreek Hill. Like it's just different. It's just different with the cheetah out there. Like it's different with Christian Watson out there as well. His ability to just pull the entire defense away. The offense is so much better when he's on the field. And it's been that way all year than it is without him on the field. And that's the big conversation coming into the year was, well, how are they going to replace Devontae Adams? And like the answer was you can't replace the best receiver in the NFL. They talked about doing it by committee and they're like, oh, we got Lazard and Cobb and Sammy Watkins. Well, Sammy Watkins got cut last week. So like that didn't work out, obviously. Romeo Doubs had some nice moments as a rookie, but in terms of dynamic playmaking ability, and I don't want to put Christian Watson in the Hall of Fame. There's a very long way to go before anything like that can happen, but he is the first receiver that this team has had in quite a while where I'm like, every time he touches it, he can score. And he's got that ability to stretch the defense, make the other teams look at him when he's not stretching the field, like not catching the ball too. So he's got that deep ball player kind of thing, but he's also got the ability to do like nuanced receiver stuff. He's still got some things he's got to learn, but the biggest difference between the team now versus what they were doing when they were on that 5-game losing streak and dropped to 3-6 and then eventually 4-8 is Christian Watson is balling and a legitimate. I'm excited to see what they do for him because they probably won't do it as much this year, but what they do when they can have an entire offseason to kind of build the offense around his abilities. So the biggest answer it's Christian Watson and I don't know if there's a close second.
Yeah, I did a preview video leading up to this. I always do like a top keys to victory, and keeping Christian Watson out of the end zone and not letting him get behind the defense was one of my top keys in that game. He's a 6'5", 210-pound alien. If you are that big and you run that fast, what are you going to stop? And I've talked about this in the preview video for the new listeners. You've got Xavier Howard, who's dinged up. He hasn't been healthy pretty much all year. No Byron Jones, no Nick Needham, no Trill Williams, no Brandon Jones. You're missing Emmanuel Ogbah on the defensive line. This team is so beat up with injuries right now that you have to be on high alert at all times because we're playing with guys. Like I just rattled off all those guys. And like you said, you're an NFL guy, so you know a lot about what this team has gone through. You're playing with a lot of guys that you didn't anticipate getting defensive snaps. You're playing with guys that you thought were going to be special teamers only. The Justin Bethels of the world, the Clayton Fedulums of the world. Those guys weren't meant to be playing meaningful snaps, especially against the likes of a guy like Christian Watson. So I'm glad you brought him up because I was going to ask you about him. But that bleeds in perfectly to what I wanted to ask you next because, in my opinion, I see a lot of Packers games. I can't say that I've seen every single snap of the season, but it seems like it's been a little bit of a different variety of a season because most NFL fans, you're used to seeing the Packers and it's Aaron Rodgers, it's pass focused. Well, it seems like you've kind of evolved to be this almost like a run first type of team, or at least the team that prefers to run the ball. I don't think Aaron Rodgers has thrown for 300 plus yards yet this season. Is there a secret to this Packers run game, or is it just the fact that you landed on Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon and they complement each other so well and they're just good?
Yeah, AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones are like, if you drew up thunder and lightning, like their skill sets complement each other perfectly. Aaron Jones is, in my opinion, one of the best backs in the NFL. And I'm not putting him on like Saquon and Christian McCaffrey and guys like that, but maybe that second tier of guys, he's an explosive playmaker. They have this weird tendency to just kind of forget he exists for a period of time, which is frustrating. they've kind of been caught in between because the best players on their team, especially coming into the season that we knew about, were their backs, Jones and A.J. Dillon.
Yep.
But you also have Aaron Rodgers, who's the 4-time league MVP, 2-time reigning league MVP, but not, the most diverse pass catching group. So they've struggled to kind of marry that whole concept together. When they've played best on offense has been when they've been able to move the ball on the ground. And December football is when A.J. Dillon comes to life over the last couple of years, especially. Now, not exactly the benefit that they have this weekend, because in Miami, it's balmy compared to it is -4 as I sit here tonight. I think it's supposed to be in the mid-50s, which is probably cold in South Florida to those people. But
freezing in South Florida, yeah.
That's pretty dang warm. And especially the Packers will probably welcome a trip like that. It seems like every time they go down to Florida, it's 100 degrees or something like that whenever they go down there. So that'll probably be a nice welcome to them. But yeah, you're right. It has been a struggle for them to do that. The nice part about it too is not just with that running back, but at the beginning of the year, they had so much dysfunction along their offensive line. Elton Jenkins had a knee injury last season, so he wasn't able to play. He played in week 2, but he was kind of still working his way back. His 1-year anniversary of his ACL injury was a month ago. So he's just kind of getting further removed from that. The David Bakhtiari saga has been well discussed. He's got some different issues that have gone through with everything, but it's been a lot on that offensive line, but they've been able to play. Bakhtiari had a weird appendectomy situation, so he hasn't played the last 2 weeks, but otherwise, Jenkins, Josh Myers, John Runyon, and Yosh Nijman have played together the last several games, and it's something the Packers have kind of spit in the face of with continuity on their offensive line over the last few years.
Yeah.
But it's something this year that has really benefited them. And if they could again, this is another thing, like looking towards 2023, if you can install that group of 5, sub out Zach Tom for David Bakhtiari, and just like, hey, these are our 5 guys, and let's see if we can get like 6 games together with them and then see what the offense can do. But yeah, the run game, the O-line, like it's all kind of meshing. What you're hoping now, if you're a Packers fan, is that it's not too late.
Right. No, it's funny that you bring up Zach Tom as well, because I'm a big, let's put it this way. We talked about it before the show. Miami Dolphins fans, there's a lot of us that really, really, really enjoy the NFL draft because like the offseason's a little bit of our Super Bowl. That's where we get all of our hope. That's where we get our players. That's where we get our excitement. So I do a lot of NFL draft, just coverage, digging into, and Zach Tom was my guy in the 4th round. And the Miami Dolphins took Eric Ezukanma. The Packers, I believe, were the next pick, and they took Zach Tom. And it crushed us. I have some listeners that were huge on Zach Tom, and it's just blown us away. But Zach Tom, like he was like a versatile guy that could play multiple positions, but I didn't know that if you really wanted him to step in year 1 right away, it's kind of a guy you wanted to get a little bit more experience. Well, you haven't had that luxury. You've kind of had to throw him in. And it seems like for the most part, and like I said, you'll know more than I will, he's kind of held his own. Has he done all right?
Yeah, and they've asked him to do a lot of different stuff. He struggled as a guard. I don't know if he can play guard in the NFL. There's a lot of functional strength that he still needs to add. He's an undersized player. I remember when he was drafted, he was listed as a center, which I think he could step in and be a very good center right now. But I really do. I think his best position is at tackle. He's played left tackle for them the last 2 weeks with Bakhtiari's injury. And I think he could play right. Like he could be this team's long-term right tackle of the future. Like you mentioned, a little undersized, has to add some strength. The way that I heard him described, I got a friend of mine who works at the Shrine Bowl, and he was talking to somebody, and he said he's the most Green Bay Packer that's ever Green Bay Packered. He played offensive tackle in college. He's versatile. He can play a lot of different positions.
That's great.
He fits all their size, strength, all that sort of stuff that they look at and go together and kind of fit their mold.
Metrics. Yeah.
But that's exactly what Zach Tom was, and he has been rock solid, if not great, even when you consider the fact that he's a 4th-round rookie. He was their 2nd 4th-round pick, if I remember. I think they took Romeo Doubs first, and then they took Zach Tom in that round. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be excited about with Zach Tom. I think that if the Packers were to lose, there's some cap. I'm not a capologist by any stretch, but there's 3 offensive linemen. Bakhtiari could be a guy or cut candidate. I don't think they'll do that, but they could. Elton Jenkins is an unrestricted free agent, and Yosh Nijman, their right tackle, is a restricted free agent. If they lose one of those guys, I think you feel pretty good about plugging Tom in there just about anywhere. And if they're able to keep all 3 of those guys, the Packers, especially under Brian Gutekunst, have done a very good job of having that stock of a swing offensive tackle, which, I mean, this as well as I do. A lot of teams don't have 2 good offensive tackles. The Packers
We
might
know
have
it all
3.
too well as Dolphins fans.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, trying to find an offensive tackle, it's not nearly as easy as the Packers have made it look when you consider Nyman I don't think he's great, but he's solid as a right tackle. That's one guy. And then David Bakhtiari, 4th-round pick, Nyman, an undrafted free agent. Zach Tom, if he's one of the tackles of the future, that's another 4th-round pick. Like Green Bay's done a really good job of getting offensive linemen and not having to use first-round picks on them, high capital on them. And the highest capital that they've used in recent memory, well, Elton Jenkins was certainly one. He was a 2nd-round pick, but before that, it was like Jason Spriggs, and he stunk. So it's almost like just take one in round 4. And I often joke when the 4th round comes around, it's like, okay, what really good all-pro offensive? Because I mean, you go back through it, TJ Lang, Josh Sitton, David Bakhtiari, Corey Linsley was a 5th-round pick. Like all of those guys were guys that got all-pro votes or actually were all-pro players for the team. So Tom may be the next guy in that lineage. Brian Gutekunst has done some things that has earned a lot of criticism. His stocking of the offensive line is not one of them because, like you've mentioned, there are a lot of teams that, like the Packers have guys now that I am pretty confident. Like Royce Newman, for example, started a bunch for them last year, has really struggled this year. I think he would start for some, I mean, not great teams, but bad teams around the league, and saying that that's like Green Bay's 8th or 9th offensive lineman right now. That is a embarrassment of riches at one of the league's most important position groups.
No, it's crazy. Me and Goody went to the same undergrad, so I'm thinking that it must be just like something in the minds there where we got some Zach Tom love going on there.
That very well
have fun with the player that I wanted, man. I guess that's all I can tell you.
Looking forward. Like I said, I'm looking forward to watch this group out. This draft class has been especially coming on a lot as of late, and they really shined Monday night. I'm seeing across the bottom, Quay Walker had a big night. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Zach Tom started and did well. Devontae Wyatt's been good in some limited snap. It is an exciting time, frustrating season, obviously with everything that's gone on, but
promise some things to build on in the future.
And now what you're hoping is that those guys, because they always say growth isn't linear. So just like Eric Stokes was the guy we were all excited about, and he stunk before he got injured. So I mean, sometimes they grow and they continue to ascend, and sometimes they flatten out, and that's kind of the fun part of this entire process.
No, absolutely. Let's talk about that defense, because if you're looking at the Packers defense, is there a specific area that teams have exploited more of on a routine basis or more often than not that you think can create some opportunities for the Dolphins offense?
Yeah, the same one that's been that way for the last 15 years. Run the ball. Hand the ball to Raheem Mostert. And Raheem Mostert is a name that shudders down my spine as a Packers fan, because he's the guy who he ran for 8 million yards as a San Francisco 49er. And
yes, he did.
I am convinced the 49ers could have won that game without attempting one forward pass.
Right.
And that is one of the most embarrassing things that can happen to you. And that was a defense that was supposedly good. That was the year of, Z and Preston. That was the year that they brought in most, drafted Savage and blah, blah, just all the way down the line. But the Packers are horrendous. And I said, I think it was after the Eagles game a few weeks ago, the Eagles ran for like 300 some odd yards. And this is as unphysical of a Packers team that I can remember. And they don't, they kind of have built their defense the way of the old, Indianapolis Colts of we're going to stop the run on our way to rushing the passer.
Yeah.
And you can't build your defense around getting them to 3rd and 9 and rushing the passer. And it doesn't help. Obviously their best pass rusher is Rashawn Gary. He's been injured since early November, but even still, when it's 3rd and 3, 2nd and 5, 2nd and 3, teams average 5, 6, 7 yards a crack. It's tough. And Cam Akers was a guy the Rams had banished, and he was in the doghouse, and then he was going to be, he averaged 5 yards a pop the other night. It is embarrassingly bad and me, I'm a guy who, if you talk to me about how I think football games are won, it's on the line of scrimmage. And I think it's that 100%. Way, both sides of the ball. The quarterback matters, the fantasy football players matter and everything like that. But I've never seen a quarterback win a game from being on his back. And the game I always point to is Patrick Mahomes against that Tampa Bay Bucks team in the Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in football by a decent sized margin, I think, as well. And it didn't matter because he could not, every drop back, he was under pressure, and they scored 9 points, and they really struggled to move the ball at all. Well, this Packers team, they've poured so many resources into this defense, and they're soft as wet toilet paper. It's horrible. It's bad, and it's hard to watch. And like I said, I know that there's some like margin for error kind of built in against the Eagles because Jalen Hurts is going to run for a lot of yards
For
against a
sure.
lot of teams.
Yep.
But the Eagles, that's another game. I think the Eagles could have won that game without attempting a forward pass. And again, like how many games are we going to have like this over a long period of time before the Packers maybe look at, hey, maybe we're not building our defense, or maybe our defensive philosophy that we've had over the last decade is not the right one.
No, you're preaching to a choir of Dolphins fans because that has been the plea over the last the road trip, the 3-game road trip. It's more runs, more runs. So, hey, maybe Christmas Day you'll get your wish, Dolphins fans, against the run defense that Jacob thinks that we can have our way against. Jacob, I gotta ask one more thing before we do our final predictions for this game. So Jaire Alexander is like the household name in that secondary. Do you think what's the history with him in a game-to-game thing? Is he traveling with Tyreek? Is he traveling with Waddle? Is it going to be more of a zone thing? Is he staying on one side? What's the strategy for when you try to contain the speed? We talk about the speed. Jaylen Waddle, Tyreek Hill.
Prayer. No, Jaire is not a shadow corner.
No.
Not by his choice. I know he was very adamant after the first game of the season. Justin Jefferson went for like $150 against them, and Alexander never really covered him that much. And he basically said, like, I wanted that challenge, but they decided on a different game plan or whatever. And the Packers secondary was supposed to be one of the best in football this year. That has not panned out that way. Alexander's their only Pro Bowler on their entire team, and he's even had a down year by like his standards, but he's still very good. Mm-hmm. It's a zone team, and I think against Miami, I know a couple weeks ago there was a lot of talk about Brandon Staley like playing the press man coverage against those guys and rerouting them. That's a dangerous way to live. Packers safety play has been terrible. Rudy Ford is a guy, you were talking about guys that you thought were going to be special teamers. He was brought in to play special teams, and that was it. He's one of their starting safeties. Adrian Amos has lost a step this year. Darnell Savage was a first-round pick. They picked up his 5th-year option. He played 1 defensive snap the other night, or 2, something like that. It was 1 or 2. It wasn't very many.
Crazy. Yeah.
He's pretty much a first-round bust at this point. But I think you have to play a lot of zone against Miami, and the Packers have typically done that. The problem they have is they're not overly aggressive in their zones. So it's almost like the idea, like there were plays where guys are catching passes on 3rd and 12 for 14 yards, and it's completely uncontested. Like I'm not a defensive coordinator. I don't pretend to be one, but I just fail to see how that happens. So I think that's going to be the game plan, is try to, zone it up, muck up some coverage a little bit, and hope Tua makes a couple of mistakes. And, that's something he hasn't done a whole lot of. So I don't know how good of a strategy that is, but the Packers are not built to play man-to-man against, Rasul Douglas is a zone corner. Keyshawn Nixon's been a nice little surprise as a nickel guy, but he's kind of a zone nickel player. Yeah, I just can't. And Jaire is a better zone corner than he is man-to-man as well, albeit he can do both. But you can't run step. Nobody in the league, doesn't matter who you have up there, can't run step for step with Tyreek Hill. And there aren't many others that can run step for step with Jaylen Waddle either. Right. So you're just trying to, Joe Barry, the defensive coordinator, much maligned, always says, put a roof on it. And I think that's what they're going to have to try and do, is to limit those big plays, and like, hey, maybe they'll score, but we're going to try and make them go 10, 12 plays to do it.
That's kind of like what the Buffalo theory was as well. It's like you keep your safeties back. You kind of try to keep everything in front of you. And if you get beat for a play here and there, but you got to try to extend the drives and everything. So that actually bleeds. Let's do some predictions. I'll go first so that I can put the last little bit of highlight on a Packers fan talking about his prediction for this game. So you can see it on the screen there. I've got the Dolphins winning this one by a touchdown, but what you said is at the end there is essentially kind of what I'm thinking when it comes to this game, because we as Dolphins fans, we see the streak that we go on. We see Tua putting up MVP-like numbers. We see Tyreek having his way, leading the NFL in receiving yards for all those weeks. Jaylen Waddle was right behind him. Well, then the last 3 weeks happen, and what is it? It's you're not running the ball. Teams are starting to take away the middle of the field. But then you started getting glimpses against the Bills where they weren't just having their way with the defense, but they were on the running attack. And what that eventually opened up, you get the deep touchdown to Tyreek. You get the touchdown across the middle to Jaylen Waddle. You get a few other chunk plays to Cedric Wilson's, other ones throughout the entire game. So what you said there about getting Tyreek open, or not Tyreek, getting Raheem Mostert going, getting the run game going, keeping that offensive balance. And I talked about this on the preview video, not a 50-50 balance. We don't need that. But what you need is you need to keep that defense honest. So every once in a while, maybe you bring an extra safety into the box. You bring in that coverage and try to make them not be able to have the top of the defense completely contained. And then when the shot play is there, you got to hit it. And this is a game, in my opinion, just trying to wrap up my thoughts on it. You don't have to have it. This isn't one of those games where, statistically speaking, the Dolphins need to win this game to make the playoffs. But if you lose this one, then you're looking at New England, which is never going to be easy, despite them having a down year, and then home against the Jets, and the Jets have a good defense. And you really want to go into two what would essentially then likely become must-win games with a 4-game losing streak. You damn near just need to win this game in order to have a little bit of momentum, get something in the win column heading into those games against divisional opponents, against teams that are looking at making a playoff run as well. So I've got the Dolphins by 7. And Jacob, I wanted to go into yours saying, you know what? You don't have to do it, but you can make a lot of Dolphins fans happy as a guy that covers the Packers, picking the Dolphins to win. So what do you think about this one?
Yeah, so here's the thing, is like you mentioned, the Packers were 4-8. And then after they beat Chicago, there was a lot of discussion about like, well, maybe the team's turned a corner, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. My take at the time was they're 5-8. 2 of their 5 wins are against the Bears, who I mentioned my sentiments on them earlier. Another one was against Tampa Bay. Another one was an overtime to the brink win against Bailey Zappi's New England Patriots. And I don't think much of Bailey Zappi either. Like, I just don't know how good this team is and how good they can be. Like, it seems like they are uncharacteristically undisciplined. They haven't taken care of the football this year. I think they've won the turnover battle in 1 game, maybe 2, which is unreal when you consider that their quarterback is the most turnover averse quarterback in NFL history. And I'm not that's not an exaggeration. That's true. That's and even Rodgers has struggled this year he has 10 interceptions. That's his most since 2010. They've had some uncharacteristic fumbles by guys you don't expect to do that. Like, just all of that has gone together. And then they beat the Rams, and it's like, okay, that's 2 in a row. Now they have to win. And the hard part when you start talking about the Packers and their potential playoff run is Miami's a better team than they are. Minnesota, it's a home game, but Minnesota is a better team than they are. And Detroit, again, a home game, but Detroit right now is a better team than Green Bay is. So put that all together, and it's like, if Green Bay wins out and has a shot to get in the playoffs, they have certainly earned it, in my opinion, because Green Bay never seems to play well in Florida. I think the last game they won in Florida was no, it wasn't the fake spike game. I lied. There was one other. They won one in Jacksonville.
I'll say a game in Jacksonville that wasn't against the Jaguars, right?
No, they did play the Jaguars to win that one. They did play a game in Jacksonville last year against the Saints, and they got 38-3. It was bad.
That's right. It was a loss.
But I just think that Miami matches up, and on the flip side, like, Green Bay's offense matches up well with the places Miami tends to be vulnerable. You know, the thing that gives me a little more optimism about this game than maybe 2 weeks ago would have been, I think Green Bay can win a shootout now. Like, I don't know how likely that is, but they can win it. You know, they can give the ball to Jones and Dillon, try and control the clock that way. They can hit enough big plays with Watson and Dobbs and Lazard and kind of, you know, make offense work that way.
Yeah.
Raheem Mostert, I mentioned the boogeyman there, and they have struggled against big play receivers this year, and the Dolphins have 2 of those. And Tua Tagovailoa is not on the level of like Patrick Mahomes, and I mean, nobody's on the level of Mahomes and Josh Allen. Those guys are in a league of their own, but he has certainly taken a leap this year from a guy that you're like, how good can you really feel about him, to I think the Dolphins are in pretty good hands for the foreseeable future. I just don't think he's going to make enough mistakes against the defense that I'm trying to find ways that they can stop them. And it seems to revolve around Miami screwing up. And I believe Mike McDaniel was on that staff with Kyle Shanahan for that NFC title game. So he's very well aware of some of those things. I think he's smart. I think he's a good coach. I think you guys are in good hands in Miami with him. I do, like I mentioned to you pre-show, I think Miami is maybe a year ahead of schedule, which isn't a bad thing. Like, there's still some success to be had in a season where, you know, they're the 6th seed and they lose to the Bengals in the first round of the playoffs because it's a road game. It's Tua and McDaniel's first. Like, look at, you know, a similar different trajectory because I think Jalen Hurts is more talented than Tagovailoa is, but Tua can play like to that level.
Mhm.
But a similar trajectory to last year's Eagles. They get in the playoffs.
Yeah.
They get exposed by a much better Tampa Bay team than what they were. And now the Eagles are the number 1 seed and, in my opinion, the best team in the NFL.
Yep.
Like, I'm not saying Miami's going to be the best team in the NFL next year, but I think that experience is something
Yeah.
that can help them next year. So I say all that to say Miami, I feel like, is a good team. I think the Packers are a decidedly average team. This game's on the road. The spread's Miami -4. I think that's really appropriate. So if you're into the wagering of jelly beans, don't wager on this game because I have it. I have Miami 28, Green Bay 24. And I think that it'll be one of those situations where Green Bay scores and gives the ball back to Miami, and Miami has a shot to run the clock out, and they do.
Yeah. No, that's music to our ears. we would need that. Like I said, it's been such a we talked about like toxic fan bases and social media and everything pre-show. The Dolphins need to get in the win column, but man, this fan base needs to get into the win column. It's the holidays. We need some people in some good spirits. There's going to be a lot of people. Like you said, you're in frigid temperatures. It's probably a hazard to have to leave the house and everything right now. Luckily, most people like in Miami don't have this and everything. But man, if you're a Dolphins fan in Wisconsin and if you lose this, you're going to be sprinting from your house. I don't care what the temperature is to go grab as much beer as you can because you're going to need to drown this one away. We need this one as a fan base, damn near more than anything.
Yeah, and you guys are pretty safe. I mean, like you mentioned, the schedule down the stretch isn't easy necessarily, right. But you're done with Buffalo, so you got to feel pretty good about your divisional matchup to end the season, which I would imagine is that the Jets. I think you said it earlier, but I don't remember. So you close with New England and New York?
At New England, home to the Jets.
Yeah. So, I mean, realistically, I think the Dolphins probably got to win one more game to get into the playoffs between an average Packers team, an average New England team, and an average to below average if Zach Wilson's playing Jets team. You got to feel good about that. They'll get in the playoffs. And then once you're in the playoffs, I mean, crazier things. Eli Manning won 2 Super Bowls, and I think Eli Manning stinks. So, like, there are plenty of examples of teams going on runs like that. Miami's got the talent. It's just a matter of, are some of those guys going to get healthy? Do they have enough pieces to do it? They got some of the formula there. They got the big play offense. They've got the pass rushers with Jaylen Phillips and Bradley Chubb, who they traded for at the deadline. And if they can get – is Agba slated to come back? I know you mentioned an injury, but no, he's not coming back. Okay.
No, pretty much all those main guys, it stinks. Like none of them are going to come back at this point. It really looks that way anyways, that pretty much all of them are out.
Okay, so that makes that a bit of a bummer. But, I mean, there are pieces there to do it. When you look up and down the roster, the Miami roster is more proven and more talented and consistent from game to game than Green Bay's is right now.
Well, like I said, music to the ears. We need this one. And I got to thank you for your time. I always enjoy having another guest on and getting that perspective from another team, not only just to get your insight on the Packers, but to see how other people view the Dolphins as well. Because sometimes I try to be as unbiased as possible, but we see our own team through a different lens. There's no way to get around it. We're both very open and honest about ourselves. So to be able to talk about from another person's perspective, and honestly, to hear the way you said it, Dolphins fans, that should make us pretty happy because, like you said, we're hearing about talent. We're hearing about a top-level offense, which we haven't had in a while. And I think Jacob hit the nail on the head because you talk about those last 3 opponents, all winnable games, opportunity to make the playoffs. Well, guess what? If you don't win those, you didn't belong in the playoffs. Yep, we were a year early. We did spring too early. We did shine too early. So you can essentially just kind of treat these games as playoff games at this point in time because that's what we got to think about it as Dolphins fans. But hey, it's Christmas. Put it on your wish list. Maybe Santa pops down your chimney, gives you a little Dolphins win.
I would prefer the Packers to give me that, but I guess I know they won on Christmas Day last year, and I think the last 2 times I know for sure the last 2 times they played on Christmas Day were both home games. But last year against I almost said Miami, Cleveland, Rodgers set the franchise record for touchdown passes. That happened like right in front of me, so that was pretty cool. Yep. And then about 10 years ago, they played on Christmas Day against the Bears. That was the 2011 team, and the Packers won by like 30 points. That Packers team was real. That's one of the best teams that has never won that didn't win a Super Bowl that particular year. So they've been good on Christmas. They've talked about it. They've fought their way into this conversation. Yeah. We'll see how much it matters. And that's a credit to, and this is something where Mike McDaniel this week has talked a lot about Matt LaFleur and the kind of person he is. But I also think that this kind of speaks to some of the culture of the team as well, because it would have been very easy at 4-8 for this team to just say, forget it. Like and it's cold in Chicago, like we're closing up shop. And then it was frigid on Monday night. Like we'll just kind of show up and see what happens. But Green Bay played well enough to win in Chicago, not their best game by any stretch. Right. And then played really well, honestly, on Monday night. But obviously with that giant asterisk that it's the Rams skeleton crew. Yeah. So this team's a little bit different. You know, Miami's going to have their starting quarterback. They're going to have all their guys.
Correct.
They have a good coaching staff over there and a team that is playing for something, which the Rams are not. And I got a lot of respect for the toughness of Baker Mayfield. I just don't know how good of an actual quarterback he is. I'm pretty sure Tua is at least a good quarterback, if not eventually a great one.
No, that's great. And like I said, thanks for your time again. And before we wrap up, why don't you go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you?
Sure. You can follow me. I'm on Twitter at Jacob Westendorf. You can find my writing work at Packer Report, and then live shows, podcasting. I've got something similar to this called Game On Wisconsin that I am the I don't know what my official title is, but I guess we kind of helped start the whole thing together. So call me the CEO if you'd like. That's
founder, cool.
Sure. At Game On WI is where you could find that. So we'll have some stuff going throughout the rest of the year. So it's a 24/7, 365-day year operation. But Ben, I appreciate you having me. It was a lot of fun.
No, absolutely. I appreciate that. And Dolphins fans, I will be back at some point after that game. Recap, takeaways. It is Christmas Day. I don't know exactly what all the plans have in store for that day. So at some point that day, I'll probably have a recap and takeaway show. If not on Sunday, most likely first thing on Monday. So stay tuned for that. But that is our time for today, Miami Dolphins fans. And until next time, Fins